Lesson 50 is where we pick up from. We've seen a little bit of the people wandering in the wilderness. Well, not really wandering, but making their way through the wilderness to Sinai, and the murmuring and complaining that had gone on, how God had cared for them many different ways. The tree had been chopped down to make the bitter water sweet. At Marah, we saw how water came from the rock at Rephidim when Moses struck it. God provided quail and manna for the people. So there's lots for them to be thankful for. Turn in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 18, if you haven't already turned there. Okay? And we'll follow along. We'll read some of the text, and then we will take a look at the story here. When Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt, then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, and her 2 sons, of which the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien in a strange land, and the name of the other was Eliezer, for the God of my father, said he, was mine help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife unto Moses into the wilderness, where he encamped at the mount of God. And he said unto Moses, I, thy father-in-law Jethro, am come unto thee, and thy wife and her 2 sons with thee. So we got to pause here just a minute. Why does Moses need Jethro to take his wife and the 2 sons with? Well, if you remember, this is the area where Jethro had lived. And if you remember, when Moses went back to Egypt during the time of the plagues, he sent his wife back to live with her father, and he sent his 2 sons as well, for them to be safe. So here, Moses gets reunited with his wife and his 2 sons. They are brought to him by his father-in-law, Jethro, and they are all reunited. Now, let's see how they meet each other, though, in verse 7. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and did obeisance and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare, and they came into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done unto Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travail that had come upon them by the way, and how the Lord delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. Pencils down here, guys. Pens. Let's follow along in the Bible. We can do it later there, Brody. Verse 10. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, for in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God. And Aaron came, all the elders of Israel, to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. So again, we see here how Moses meets his father-in-law. He goes out, probably not the way you would greet anyone today. But here we see they did obeisance, which means they bowed down to one another. Probably when you saw your cousins or your uncle or your aunt or any relatives at the holidays, you didn't bow down to them. Maybe you shook their hand, or maybe you gave grandma a hug. But here we see Moses and his father-in-law, they bow down to each other and they kissed each other. And then they begin to ask about what's been going on in each other's lives. And we see Moses probably could tell his father, here's the plagues that happened, how God took care of the Israelites in the plagues. Only the first 3 affected the people. And then in the land of Goshen, God watched over them. And then he could tell them about the Passover feast and painting the blood on the doorposts so that the angel of God would not kill the firstborn in that home. And then he could tell them about how they had headed on out of Egypt and how they felt trapped by the Red Sea. But God had cared for them and delivered them then and had drowned most of the Egyptians in the Red Sea. And then how, passing through the wilderness, the bitter water was made sweet. quail and the manna comes each morning and each evening to eat. How they had defeated Amalek by holding his hands with a staff over his head. And how water had come from the rock when he had struck it. All of these things Moses explains, we see here. We don't see Moses complaining or whining. He didn't tell about how difficult his life was, managing all these whiners and complainers. We don't see any of that. Instead, he speaks positively about this life. Okay? So that's good. That's an example that we can have in our lives too. We should speak positively about the life God has given to us. Okay? So all of these stories, Jethro hearing them, help him so that he says, now I know there is no God greater than this God. That could be a question for us. What Bible story in the Scriptures makes our faith stronger? Is it maybe when you hear about the Baal prophets and Elijah on Mount Carmel and jumping around and cutting themselves and trying to make fire come down from heaven? Is it the story of Lazarus being taken out of the grave after 4 days and walking? Okay? There are many wonderful stories in the Bible that are there to encourage us. What Bible story encourages you? Hopefully each of us can think of some that are encouraging to each of us. But we're going to go on and we're going to see. Jethro is going to notice that Moses has a problem in his life. Okay? Verse 13, and it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, what is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone? And all the people stand by thee from morning unto even? And Moses said unto his father-in-law, because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another, and I do make them know the statute of God and his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, the thing that thou doest is not good. Thou wilt surely wear away both thou and this people that is with thee, for this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Hearken now unto my voice, I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to Godward, that thou mayest bring the causes unto God, and thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt show them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50, and rulers of tens. And let them judge the people at all seasons. And it shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. For so it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. If thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure, and this people shall also go to their place in peace. So Moses hearkened to the voice of his father-in-law, and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of Israel, and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of tens. And they judged the people at all seasons, and the hard causes they brought unto Moses, but every small matter they judged themselves. And Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. So, some wisdom here. When they wake up the next morning, Moses probably, after the morning meal, gets himself up, heads outside of his tent to some place, maybe a large rock or somewhere where he can sit down in the shade under a tree, we can imagine, out of the heat of the day. And there, already probably waiting for Moses, is men and women who have arguments, who have disagreements. There's probably a long line of them already lined up, waiting to see Moses. And when Moses gets there, he sits down in the shade, we can imagine. And the first people who have a trouble or a discrepancy or an argument, they come before Moses, they tell him the story, he listens to both sides, and he makes a decision. They go their way, and up comes the next group of people. Same thing happens. And over, and Jethro sees Moses doing this. Maybe Jethro is standing next to him. Maybe he's standing a little ways back, just observing the whole, taking it all in. But he sees this process is a long process. The line continues to build. It goes on and on and on. Every day Moses is spending all day settling disagreements and arguments. And maybe at the end of the day, or maybe at the lunchtime meal, we don't know. But sometime when Moses comes back and has a private moment with Jethro, his father-in-law, who's an older man and wise, gives some suggestions to Moses. He says, now Moses, what you are doing, sitting there day after day, you're going to get worn out. You're going to get burned out. You're going to become unhappy. You're going to become cynical. You're going to want to listen to those stories all day after a while. And the people, they aren't going to like listening to you. Okay? If you side with this guy, then he and his family are going to like you. But the loser, this guy over here, aren't you kidding? He and his family aren't going to like you. And pretty soon all of Israel is going to be split down the middle. Some are going to like you and some are not going to like you. And not that liking them is important, but they aren't going to follow you. They won't even listen to you, Moses, because you've settled everyone's disagreements and you've made half of the people happy and you've made half of them upset at you. Okay? Well, maybe it was a little bit hard for Moses to hear initially, just like any time the work that we're doing, when someone is a little bit critical of it, we're not real happy about hearing it. But there's some wisdom a lot of times in listening to that person, and that's what Moses had here. He had wisdom. He listened. Well, I was unhappy with what my father-in-law said. Maybe true. I think I do a pretty good job. The people view me as important. I like my job. I like that they come to me. But there's wisdom in what he says. And what did Jethro say to Moses? Well, this is what Jethro said. He said to Moses, what you need to do is you need to go out and you need to find wise men. There are other wise men in the tribe of Israel beside you who love the Lord. Okay? And take everybody and maybe split them in half first. This half of people, this guy is going to decide your disagreements. This half the people you're going to... And anyways, you just split them up over and over and over again. Till pretty soon the smallest groups were down to 10. You 10 families dwelling in your tents, if you have a problem, if there's a disagreement amongst the people in your groups, you first go to this man. He's in charge of your 10, and he will decide the matter. Obviously, then if some of the people are upset, they're not upset with Moses, they're upset with that man. Okay? They need to get over it, but that's who they're going to be upset with rather than Moses. And then if that matter is still not really agreed upon, or it's a very weighty matter, then there's another man you can go to, and he's over 50 families. And then if that man still isn't agreed upon, or no one likes his decision, then you go to another man who's over hundreds of families. And if that still isn't good enough, then you go to a man who's over thousands of families. And still after that, if you can't come to an agreement, you go to Moses. Still the same system that we use in the United States, in our court system, and our laws. Still the same system we use with our churches. Right? Start small. If you break a law, the local court system deals with it. Okay? If you don't like the decision that's made by the judge or the jury, you can appeal your decision to a higher court. And if you don't like theirs, a higher court. And if you don't like theirs, a higher court. Until finally you get to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court. Okay? The model that we have here from Jethro is still used today. And it was a wise model, and Moses implements it so that he chooses men, some men to be over tens, some men to be over 50s, some men to be over hundreds, and some men to be over thousands. And then finally there's Moses. So now, the nice thing is Moses might be only hearing 1 or 2 or maybe 3 discrepancies or cases a day, or maybe even none. But he's not hearing so many, all of them. And not everybody is getting upset with him. Okay, so he's not going to get burned out, and the people aren't going to turn a deaf ear to him because they don't want to hear what he has to say anymore because he's decided everybody's case. Now he's only deciding a few. He's not being lazy here. This is wisdom. Okay? It's much wisdom for him. All right, chapter 19 then talks about what happens when the people first get to Sinai. We know that, excuse me, if you look at Exodus chapter 20, if you look ahead, that's what is read to us each Sabbath day in church, right? The 10 Commandments. So, before we take a look at that and have a lesson on the 10 Commandments, we need to have a lesson on what was going on just before them. Okay? So Exodus chapter 19, make sure everyone's following along there. It says, in the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. So 3 months later. For they were departed from Rephidim, and were come to the desert of Sinai, and had pitched in the wilderness. And there Israel camped before the mount. And Moses went up unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thou shalt say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. So, here the people have been gone out of Egypt for 3 months. What's been leading them through the wilderness? By day, Amber? And by night, Jaden? Yeah, a pillar of fire. Pillar of cloud by day, and a pillar of fire by night. Okay? And that's important here, because we'll see how God settles onto the mount so that the people can see where he is, and they know that that land is holy ground. Okay? So, take a look at verse 7. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded them. And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord hath spoken, we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, Lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with thee, and believe thee forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. So that thick cloud, it will settle down, okay, on the mount, on Mount Sinai. Later on the tabernacle, the cloud will come and it will sit on top of the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. Okay? So that cloud is important. It shows the people where God is. Okay? Now, here's something that the people have to do though, verse 10. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes and be ready against the 3rd day. For the 3rd day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. So that cloud will settle down on top of the mount. Sometimes maybe if you go somewhere, we think of fog. If we were out in the mountains, the clouds might be low enough that we can't see the tops of the mountains. That's what it will be like. This cloud that guides them through the wilderness will settle down on top of that mount. And so before that cloud settles down on the mount, what do the people have to do? They have to cleanse themselves. They have to wash themselves. Take a good bath before every Sunday, right, Brody? Oh boy. Yeah, maybe a lot of you probably do that. Saturday night, take a shower or a bath after the week or after a day of playing. Cleanse yourself. Get yourself cleaned up before you head to church. And that's what the people had to do here too. They had to cleanse themselves. They had to be clean. And they were told to do it on these 2 days, for on the 3rd day the Lord will come and he will visit that mount. Cleanliness there is a picture of the cleansing of sin. We need to be cleansed from our sin. And so did these people. That was a picture. Okay? And then they had to learn that they couldn't go up all on that mountain. Verse 12 says, And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves, that ye go not up unto the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever toucheth the mount shall be surely put to death. The mount that the cloud of God settles on will now be, just like when Moses had to take off his sandals before stepping by that burning bush, holy ground. The people are not to go running up and climb up into the mountain. They're not to play on it, to touch it. The mountain is holy. Okay? They needed, in the end, a fence around it to keep the people away so that they didn't wander off into the mountain. Or we could think of the wicked people, like those from the Tower of Babel, who maybe would have climbed up that mountain so that they could get to the top because they wanted to see God. Well, they wouldn't have gotten very far. God would have struck them dead. And that's what he's warning the people here. Okay? Don't go up onto the mount. Okay? So, and Moses went down from the mount unto the people, and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said unto the people, Be ready against the 3rd day. Come not at your wives. And it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of all the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the nether part of the mount. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mount. And the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. And let the priests also which come near to the Lord sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break forth upon them. And Moses said unto the Lord, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for thou chargest us, saying, Set bounds about the mount, and sanctify it. And the Lord said unto him, Away, get thee down, and thou shalt come up, thou and Aaron with thee. But let not the priests and the people break through to come up unto the Lord. So he brake forth upon them. And Moses went down unto the people, and spake unto them. So we see some back and forth here. Moses goes up into the mountain to speak to God. Okay? God speaks to him, and then Moses has to go down and relay that word to the people. Okay? So he tells them, don't come up on the mount. You need to cleanse yourselves, and you need to be clean. Okay? We can imagine, we've seen some probably pretty bad thunderstorms, probably somewhere, maybe you've even been a little bit afraid from the loudness of the thunderclap. Makes you jump even in your house because it seems like it just broke overhead. Well, I'm going to say it's probably pretty safe to say that this was much worse. Hey, if we had been there at the mount, it would have been much worse for us to hear all those things. We read here, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud, and the voice of a trumpet was so loud. We know later on that the people can't even stand it. They tell Moses, Moses, tell God, his voice is too great for us. You go to the mount and you talk to God for us. We can't even listen to him. It's so terrible and so loud. Okay? So, that's what the people are going to ask. But they can't ask that yet because they need to hear what we'll see here is that chapter 20 is God spake all these words. But if you look ahead, skip ahead to chapter 20. We'll peek ahead here and cheat. Okay? Verse 19, and they said unto Moses, Speak thou with us, and we will hear, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. That's why we can say, none of us has said, boy, that lightning overhead, it's so loud I'm going to die because of it. We might think, I might die if that lightning hits my house, or I might die if a tornado comes ripping through in the storm and hits my house. But just the sound of it probably isn't going to kill us. But the Israelites here, they can't take it anymore. The thundering, the lightning, the loud voice of God sounding abroad is a great trumpet. They can't take it, and they finally have to ask Moses to make him stop. That shows just how great these words are. Okay? God needs to teach them. He's going to give them the 10 Commandments there. The beginning of chapter 20, God is going to speak to them so that they have no excuse for not knowing God's law. You have been told, it's been explained to you, now do it, obey, and command. But the people are afraid. They are not able to come near the mount. They are filled with sin. They are wicked, just as we are. That's why we can't directly go to God either. Who intercedes on our behalf for us? Jen. Jesus does. He brings our prayers to God because we are sinful human creatures. But Jesus, who has died on our behalf, he is perfect. And therefore he, as both God and man, can take our prayers before God. Okay? So Jesus is an example of that mediator that Moses is going to have to be here too. Okay? But the people need to cleanse themselves. They need to be ready to hear. That's why a good Sunday night is important to prepare ourselves to go up into the house of the Lord. If we're out at all hours of Saturday night, partying, having a good time, we're not going to find ourselves ready to go into God's house of worship. In fact, we'll probably find ourselves sleeping through the services, find ourselves too tired to even barely get out of bed. So it's important that we prepare ourselves before God, before the day of the Lord on the Sabbath day. And the people here show that example too. Before they are going to go before the Lord and hear him, they too need to cleanse themselves. That's why before we have the Lord's Supper, we have that too. A time where, next week will be preparatory here at church. Okay? We need to contemplate, think about what are the things that we need to cleanse ourselves. We need to reflect in our lives and see, yes, there are sins I need to cast out of my own life before I can come before God. Looking at your questions, okay, I think most of them are pretty straightforward. You can answer them from the lesson. Okay. F there, what was God's purpose in bringing the Israelites to Mount Sinai? What do you think that was? What was his goal here? Why do they have to come to Mount Sinai? Was he going to give them, Amber or Jen? Right. They need to arrive here so that the Lord at Mount Sinai can give to them the 10 Commandments. Now in verse 4 of chapter 19, I asked, what is the picture? What is the beautiful picture that he's making there? Brody? Yeah, well, here he's not sheltering us. He is, what is the eagle doing in that verse, verse 4? Just going to look back. Amber? Lifting us up, carrying. Okay, a mother eagle will carry her babies up to make sure that they're protected, but also to help to teach them to fly and to learn those things too. And that is the picture that's being made here. We are as baby eagles being carried on the wings there. Beautiful picture. Okay, God carries us. He watches over us. That's our relationship with God. We are not left alone all by ourselves. Okay?